Well, welcome to week 2 of The Yarn. I am so excited to be teaching out this series that comes with the tagline, 10 Practical Ways to Connect During COVID. In fact, I'm so excited, I'd like to dump all 10 of these ways on you right now, but I know that would be extremely overwhelming. So we're gonna take our time over 4 weeks and we're just gonna teach it out one or two of these at a time. Now, you might be sitting there saying, The Yarn? That's kind of a weird name for a series. Why would you call it The Yarn? Where does that even come from? Is that even in the Bible? Well, it actually is. In fact, if we look at Colossians 2:2, it says this. It says, I want them to be encouraged and knit together by strong ties of love. I want them to have complete confidence that they understand God's mysterious plan, which is Christ Himself. Did you catch that? Knit together with strong ties of love. It's a brilliant description because when you're knitting something together, you are creating something. You're creating something new. You're joining something. You're interlacing the yarn. The yarn is binding and uniting and interlocking, and the various sections of the yarn are being woven together. Paul isn't primarily talking about knitting together a sweater. He's talking about how our lives are knit together. And he's saying that the characteristics that mark our uniting and our connecting are that they are joining and they're uniting and interlacing and being interlocked and woven together with strong ties of love. So what is the actual yarn in Paul's analogy? Well, if we take it apart, I would suggest and I would argue that the yarn is the actual practical, tangible ways that we can connect. I can well imagine Paul 2,000 years ago preaching a sermon to the church of Colossae called The Yarn, 10 practical ways to stay connected as a church. And I bet it would have everything to do with make sure that you're coming to church and we're meeting together. Make sure when you come to church you shake hands and you hug, and he even talks about kissing one another with a holy kiss. It would be, hey, let's sing songs loudly and praise together. Let's have lots and lots of meals together. And he probably reinforced it by saying, and when you leave, make sure you shake hands and you hug. All stuff that 7 months ago would have been very, very practical and relevant for us, but now with this pandemic are completely off base. We're not allowed to do any of that stuff. So we're trying to find 10 practical ways to connect in the middle of a pandemic in a way that keeps us knit together in these bonds as strong ties of love. So last weekend we rolled out strategy number 1, make a weekly appointment with your churchies. Now, I am not going to re-explain all of that or why I even use the word churchies, but I will tell you this. It came straight out of Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, where it says this, and let us not neglect the meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his returning is drawing near. So what the writer of the Hebrews here is saying is that there are some people who actually have taken a lackadaisical, careless approach to their church connection and their connection with other people. He says these are people who no longer worship together. These people don't have spiritual conversations together. These people don't any longer dive into the Word of God together. They don't pray for each other. And he's saying this, don't be like that. Don't be like one of those people who neglects the gathering together. Rather, make a weekly appointment. So practicality of this would be that you would contact 1 or 2 other people, say, hey, after the service every week, let's take time to go through those message application questions and apply them to our own lives and our own souls. Or secondly, simply make sure that you have a time throughout the week sometime when you're having a spiritual conversation with somebody. What's a spiritual conversation? Simply talking about what God's doing in your life or talking about what's happening in the Word of God and your understanding of this. So that's point number 1, make a weekly appointment with your churchies. Then we rolled out our second way to live out this connection from Colossians 2:2 to be knit together in the strong ties of love. Number 2, refuse to have a puny faith. Supersize it. Now again, unique language. I'm not going to go into reteaching it all, but basically it came out of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians and a conversation that we had with a clinical psychologist named Dr. Brad Strawn from Pasadena, California. Dr. Strawn stated that not only our faith, but our entire lives are supersized. They grow, they increase, they expand, they flourish when we are in healthy connections with one another. And that's one of the things that COVID is threatening right now. And so we talked about this idea of having this mindset that says, I will not allow my faith and my life to become puny. We kind of likened it to going and hiding in the basement for 6 months watching Netflix. Instead, I'm going to allow my faith to grow and increase and flourish by having healthy connections. So this one really is all about having a mindset that says, I will not become puny. I will supersize my life even during the restrictions of a pandemic. Okay, so now we're all caught up in the first two strategies, and I'm really excited to teach out the third strategy. It has everything to do with Philippians 2 and socks. And here it is, number 3, engage in a missional endeavor together. It comes out of a very concise and pointed verse in Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 that says, don't look only for your own interests. Don't look only for your own interest, but take an interest in other people. Now, this strategy to engage in a missional endeavor together can actually be a little bit tricky to maneuver, because here's the deal. Every one of us feels like right now our finances are being threatened, our relationships are being threatened, our kids' education, or maybe our education is threatened, our careers, our mental health, our connections and our well-being and our family gathering. I mean, you name it, it's all being threatened right now. And what that causes us to do is it causes us to become more protective and to roll up in like a fetal position and become safe. It causes us to become smaller and to look very myopically at ourselves. It's just natural. When you're going through a crisis, we're going to look myopically at ourselves. And what this verse is saying is, listen, don't only look at yourself, but rather look to the needs of other people. Many of you are familiar with the Love and Respect book and the Love and Respect course, the video course that Dr. Emerson and Sarah Egrich put out. Carolyn has often led couples through this course. It's a really powerful teaching on how to have a strong marriage. Well, they have a daughter named Joy, and Joy was beginning to get into the ministry, and she was part of their ministry for about 3 years. Life was going so well. She was about to marry the man that she loves. She couldn't wait to settle down and be in this relationship with him. Life was magical until one day, it wasn't.
About 2 or 3 years in, I was dating someone and I was about to get married. And so I had someone come in and they were going to take over my job because I wanted to spend more time with my future husband, and then things ended, and we didn't get married, and I was kind of broken, and someone was already taking over my job. So essentially, I left Love and Respect for a while and just took some time to think and sulk in my misery. But I was at such a low point, and I didn't know what to do. And I remember my dad saying to me, you know, when you're this low, Joy, the only thing that you can do is serve. And that was just so mind-boggling for me, because I was like, I can't serve. I have absolutely nothing to give. But he knew if I didn't serve that I would just open the doors to become really bitter at men, to just be angry with God and just the situation at hand, because life did not happen how I thought it was supposed to happen. But by serving, I could understand and empathize with other people's pain and heartache. And so through a series of circumstances, the Lord just brought people into my life, and I started hearing their stories, and my love and my empathy grew in a way that was completely unnatural to who I normally am. I went from being this analytical person who would give people advice and just be like, you're in a bad relationship, get out of it. And now I just know there's so many layers and there's so much that happens in our heart. And so I want to be there for this generation. I want to help them figure out what it is that we need to learn before we get married, so that we don't 20 years in say, why didn't anybody teach us this? I wish I would have known then what I know now.
Wow, Joy was at the bottom of the barrel. She had been in bed in a depressive state for 3 weeks. Her life had been crushed. Her hopes had been crushed. She was living with tremendous disappointment, and she was in protective mode. And then her dad comes to her and says, look, when you are this low, when you hit this low spot in the bottom of the barrel, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to serve. And Paul says in Philippians 2:4, don't look only to your own interests. Even when you're in a tough situation, don't look only to your own interests, but rather to the interests of others. So I'm really excited about this number 3 practical way for us to connect, which is to engage in a missional endeavor together. And it has everything for us to do with socks. Now, this is just one way of engaging in a missional endeavor, but it's something that we can do together over the next couple of months. And I've asked Pastor John to actually introduce us to it and to roll it out for us.
Well, Church, it's a thrill to be able to join with Jim Bell, who's the CEO of Siloam Mission. I've had the opportunity, as of recent, to get to know Jim a little bit more and to actually work quite closely with him as we've developed our Riverwood housing project. So, Jim, thank you for joining us, and it's a real thrill for us as a church to hear from you.
Thank you, John. The thrill and the privilege is mine. It's been great to get to know you, and on behalf of Siloam, hello, Riverwood, on behalf of all of us.
Well, Jim, as I had mentioned, we're in a series right now that we've called The Yarn, and we're really looking at how this current pandemic is threatening our connection, our human contact and our connectivity. At Siloam and in the landscape that you see, how are you saying this pandemic impact those you're caring for?
But we do see the impact. Like, we've had to make some changes in terms of how we serve people. Reduction of numbers in the drop-in, for example. Our drop-in is where people congregate, come in, grab a meal, sit at a table, and it wasn't uncommon to have over 200 people in there at the same time for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Well, now that's down to 50, 60, and 70 at a time. People that stay in our shelter are able to enjoy their meal in the drop-in, but people that are coming from the outside now, they get a meal at the door. You talk about the social impact. You know, people that come in, people that are experiencing hardship and homelessness, they are a community, and a tight community. They understand each other. They sit at the table, they break bread together, and they need each other. Yes, they need us that are providing the essential services, so to speak, and they certainly go beyond the nourishing meals and a warm bed. That extends to clothing and transition services one-on-one. But we are trying to be very mindful of that, so that people, while they have a bed and while they have a nourishing meal, that they still have the opportunity to interact. And it might be now, instead of being around the table 4 and 5 at a time, you might be speaking to somebody that's 8 and 10 feet apart from you. So it's our ability to provide services. We continue to provide the essential services. Volunteers, we can no longer right now. Volunteers are near and dear and a tremendous part of the fabric of Siloam. Right now, in a code red, we don't have any volunteers. So the domino effect of this pandemic, we've all seen it across all sectors, and certainly within the homelessness sector, we have not been spared that. In some ways, it's very, very complex.
You know, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was your thought about this. For most of us, we're shrinking our contacts. There's these restrictions, and we're trying to navigate it in our own lives. I think a lot of us are, maybe turning our eyes inward to say, what do we need to do? But one of the questions I have, is there a threat for us to begin to focus inward and to really lose it? I guess my question is empathy at risk right now?
To answer your question, is empathy at risk? I suppose it is, in the sense that when we see the domino effect of this pandemic, yes, around the illness, the sickness itself and the virus. We've talked about perhaps mental health. We've seen it across sectors in terms of how it's impacting people economically, lost jobs, getting in assistance lines for monies and those types of things. But I must tell you, even though empathy may be at risk, I will tell you at Siloam, one interesting and encouraging thing is we see that people are rallying to try to support those in great need. So whether it be dollars or food or clothing, it's one of the, amongst all the complexities of this pandemic, it is a true encouragement and inspiration as we see our community rally to the cause. And I hope that's the case. I hope that's the case with other organizations that are nonprofits that are endeavoring to do the same. And the reason I say that is we are truly all in this together. We are all in this together. People in Winnipeg and throughout Manitoba, they continue to display supreme generosity and care.
That's really hopeful, and I love that perspective that you carry. And I think we would share the same encouragement to everybody, which is continue to seek to understand how this is impacting other people. Fight hard for that understanding. This coming month at Riverwood, we're giving the opportunity to just have a practical way for us to remember others in this. We're calling it Socks and Groceries because we're going to combine two things that we see as a need right now. For $25, people can just give a gift of $25. It's going to buy a hearty pair of socks that is going to be given through Siloam Mission. We're partnering with you. In fact, we're partnering with an organization called Pay It Backwards, which you have partnered with before, and this is a really high quality pair of socks that will be provided and distributed. And at the same time, groceries around our community, we see a need increasing towards Christmas for food support.
Year-round underwear and socks. I can tell you they will be well received by those that need, our community members. I can tell you this morning, when I got up and I went to my closet, I had a choice. I had a choice of which pair of warm socks I wanted to put on today. The people that we serve often don't. And I will tell you that the people that will receive these socks, they need them. But please know, much needed and received with a thank you by those in need.
Thanks, Jim. You know, I really want to take a moment as from Riverwood to thank you and to your organization, your workers, your staff.
God has a very protective hand, and it's much, much bigger than what I ever would have imagined. So to you and all your caring people at Riverwood, I pray that God's gracious and large protective hand extends over each and every one of you. God bless you. You have a big project of your own that you're undertaking. We're pulling for you. We look forward to working with you. We're all in this together too, in the project that you're in, that we're in. So may God continue to extend his graces over you and your community. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks so much for your time, Jim. And for Riverwood, to get involved in our Socks and Groceries is really simple. Just go to the app, or you can go on our website and you just follow the links and you can contribute $25. It'll buy a pair of socks that will go to somebody that needs it, and you can get some groceries for us to distribute to our community over this coming season as the needs are high. Thanks, Jim. Have a great weekend ahead of you, and we look forward to talking soon.
So that's a quick introduction into 3 practical ways to be the yarn that strongly ties us together that Paul talks about in Colossians 2:2. Number 1, make a weekly appointment with your churchies. Number 2, it's a mindset thing. Refuse to have a puny faith. Rather, supersize it. Supersize your life by leveraging these connections. Number 3, engage in a missional endeavor together. Now, before we move on to number 4 and 5, I want to just pause for a second and acknowledge that there's probably a bunch of us that are living a similar experience to where Joy was. There's a lot of pressure going on in our life. There's a lot of stuff happening around us that's scaring us. It's stirring up our emotions. We're living with some disappointment, and maybe we're even sort of figuratively under the covers, just hiding from life right now. And Ben and the team have a powerful new song that talks about the hope that we find in Jesus Christ and where that light actually comes into the darkness. So let's take a few moments to worship together, and then we'll be back to strategy number 4 and 5 and how we can connect better during COVID. Well, I can't think of a better place to teach out strategic connecting strategy number 4 and 5 than right here at Brookside Cemetery in the Field of Honor. The Field of Honor opened in 1915 when a charitable group called the Daughters of the Empire, went to the city of Winnipeg and said, we're going to need a space at Brookside Cemetery to put the bodies and to bury the veterans returning from World War I. Now, admittedly, the vast majority of us are so far removed and have no experience with the anguish and the pain of somebody either being in war or not coming home from a war. And yet this next Wednesday has been set aside to remember. To remember what? Well, in short, to remember the 118,000 Canadians who sacrificed their lives in service of their country. 10,000 of those veterans buried right here in Winnipeg. I want to slow us down for a minute, and I want you to use your imagination. Imagine filling the MTS Center to capacity with as many people as you could, but these are veterans who sacrificed their lives and have passed away. every single seat filled in the MTS Center. And you're walking up and down the aisles and the staircases and into the balcony. And occasionally you stop to read the name badge of someone who gave their life for their country. You look at the ranks that they earned and the awards that they earned on the battlefield. And you stop to have a conversation with maybe a dozen of them through your walk. Tell me your story. Where were you posted? What was it like? What were the conditions like when you were fighting? When you were on your last day, what were you thinking? What were you afraid of? Who was waiting at home for you? What dreams did you have that never became fulfilled? My guess is that you would have a dozen of those conversations and your heart and your mind would be so overwhelmed with the gravity of the loss of life. Now, you'd look around and you'd see 16,300 people sitting in that arena, every one of them having sacrificed their life for their country. And then an announcement comes and all of those people are ushered out and a whole new group of 16,000 come in. And you do the same thing. And this happens 7.5 times. That would be 118,000 people that you would be seeing and having exposure to. And imagine the 118,000 families that were broken and were grieving so deeply as a result of the loss of life. This is what we're remembering. This is what we remember this next Wednesday. That these are not just numbers, they're not just indescript gravestones. These are people. These are people just like you and I, but people who fought for their country and died for the country. They fought and died for you and I. Well, if that little imaginary scenario actually happened and we were able to communicate and have conversations, I'd love to walk back into the MTS Center and sit down and ask some of those veterans, what got you through? What gave you strength when you were in the middle of those battles? How did you keep your sanity? Now, we don't have that opportunity to have that conversation. However, there was a man, a Vietnam veteran named William Broyles, who answered those questions in a book called Brothers in Arms. And I want to read for you a little bit of what he said. He said, "A part of me loved war. Now please understand, I'm a peaceful man, fond of children and animals, and I believe that war should have no place in the affairs of man. But the comradeship that our platoon experienced in the Vietnam War provided an enduring memory in me. A comrade in war is someone you can trust with anything because you regularly trust him with your life. In war, individual possessions and advantages count for nothing. The group, the unit, the platoon is everything. In war, we regularly risked our lives for each other. We often felt close enough to each other to call one another brothers." Church, as pastors, during this COVID season, we have moved so far past wanting to see nice, carefully structured little programs and conventional ministry initiatives. Like I mentioned last weekend, we're in a war. All of us, we're all in a war. This COVID thing is threatening so much about our lives, not just conveniences, but actually threatening our finances, our mental well-being, our spiritual well-being, and as we're talking about, our connections, our vitality in life and how we connect with one another. This is more than just an inconvenience. This is a threat, and it's a battle we need to fight together. So for the next 7 months, we're going to actually shift our language. No longer will we be asking, hey, have you signed up for a small group? Rather, we're going to be asking questions like, how is your COVID platoon doing? We're not going to be trying to convince you and ask you, hey, have you ever considered signing up for a small group? We're rather going to be saying, hey, who's in your platoon? Who's got your back? Who's your first line of defense? Who are you covering and who is covering you? Because it's absolutely essential that you have a spiritual COVID platoon covering you and doing this thing together. So connecting strategy number 4 is form a COVID platoon. Now this is pretty strange language and it needs some unpacking and it comes with a whole bunch of questions. And here's the first question: is there anything in the Bible that would support us doing something like this? And I want to tell you that there is so much in the Bible about being in a platoon, in a small grouping where you've got one another's backs and when you're caring for one another. For instance, Romans 12:10, be devoted to one another. How can we be devoted to one another from a distance? How can we be devoted to one another when we're living superficial, surfacey relationships? We can't. In order to be devoted to one another, we need to be committed to one another. And then 1 Corinthians 12:25, care for one another. Again, how can we care for one another if we don't know one another's names, if we don't know the struggles that someone else is having, and if we're not willing to pray for one another? We need to be in this I've got your back kind of COVID platoon. Here's another one, Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens. Again, have you ever tried to bear somebody's burden that you don't know their name, you don't know anything but surfacey information, and you never go any deeper, and you certainly never talk about the real challenges of life? You can't do it. You've got to be in a relationship, in a small gathering where you can actually bear one another and carry one another's burdens. Here's another one, Philippians 2:5, look out for one another. I love that one. That's what a platoon does. That's what William Broyle said, that they looked out for one another. It wasn't about personal possession. It wasn't about just my life and me and just focusing on myself. It was looking out for one another, having one another's backs, but doing it in a strategic way. Practical question number 2, how is an existing small group or network group different than a COVID platoon? Are we adding COVID platoons to our already existing programs? Actually, the whole language of COVID platoon is going to replace small groups and network groups for the next 7 months. We want to become much more missional. This isn't sort of a nice little church program thing we're talking about. We're talking about survival. We're talking about how we as a church continue to connect in meaningful ways, and we actually get through the dark winter nights that we're about to face and the dark nights of COVID that we're about to face. How are we going to do that? Well, we're becoming a little bit militant in this, and we're going to say, you know what, we're going to get strategic, and we're going to form these COVID platoons. So everybody that's in a small group now or a network group, we're going to stop using that language for the next 7 months. And during this whole pandemic, we are going to move to COVID platoons, and those will move to COVID platoons as well. Practical question number 3, if I was to take a chance and enlist or join or start one of these COVID platoons, what do we even do? It sounds sort of weird. What are we supposed to do? Well, it's really, really simple. Check in with each other, find out how life is going. That's pretty easy. Check the manual, check the orders. Take a moment to check into the Word of God, whether you're using the message application questions or you're just looking at one verse together, but make sure that you're in the Word every time you get together, and then pray for one another. That is it. Practical question number 4. What if I'm already in a small group? How does that relate to this COVID platoon, and what am I supposed to do? Really simple. Just simply go to the web page. You'll find it there, this COVID platoon, and just register your group. So your small group basically turns into a COVID platoon. You can continue to operate the way you've been operating. We cheer you on. We think it's fantastic. Just make sure you're checking in with each other, you're in the Word, and you're praying for each other. Practical question number 5. How long is this commitment? If I sign up for one of these or I form one of these, what are you actually asking for? Well, we're going to do this for 7 months until May, and hopefully that'll get us through the dark winter. And we're suggesting that every week it takes 30 minutes, that you just set aside 30 minutes. Most of these are going to be Zoom conversations, and those are not easy to maintain. So we're just saying, hey, for 30 minutes, connect yourself to another group of people where you're checking in, you're checking the Word, and you're praying for each other. Practical question number 6. Why should I join one of these COVID platoons, or why should I transition our small group or even identify our small group as a COVID platoon? What are the benefits? Well, we're going to make sure that we check in on you. We're going to make sure that you've got resources. We're going to make sure that you're encouraged. If you have any questions, we're going to make sure that we just resource you and care for you, and we're going to pray for you as a COVID platoon. You're going to identify yourself, and we're going to know who you are, making sure that nobody falls through the cracks. Practical question number 7. What if I don't know anybody at Riverwood? I don't have any connections to actually join or start a COVID platoon. What do I do then? You know, we've been doubling down on our social media and our digital communications, and we've been getting a number of messages back that say exactly that. I'm new to Riverwood. I don't live in the city. I don't have connections. I don't know anybody, but I really want to get connected. How do I get connected? Well, we're right now setting up a web page where you'll be able to go to that. You'll be able to click on Connect Me, and it'll lead you through how to get connected. And here's what we need. We need Riverwooders to have their arms and their hearts open. We need Riverwooders to say, you know what, I will be available to meet with new people, to coach them, to bless them, to connect with them, to get to know them, to check in with them, look at the Word, and to pray for them. You know, we've got a lot of small groups right now, but I can tell you that just about every small group has indicated to us that they're closed. They're not open right now to new people. Now, that's not entirely bad. However, if we have no groups that are open, that makes it really difficult for anybody who wants to get connected. In fact, our preference would be that we would start opening up groups all over the place, that we would open up these COVID platoons and just say, hey, you want to be part of a COVID platoon? You can join mine. So go to the website and you're going to see, it's going to walk you through how to get connected. We want to become an incredibly welcoming place where we're ready to take people in to help them fight the threats of COVID. All right, so together we're building an arsenal of weapons that we can use against the COVID threat that it poses to our mental, our spiritual, and our emotional, and our relational health. The first one is make a weekly appointment with a churchie. This means really make sure that you don't miss a service. Worship together. Get into the Word with us together. Connect together with us in the service, and then find some way to have a spiritual conversation after that with someone else. Number 2, refuse to have a puny faith. Don't hide in the basement watching Netflix, but rather supersize your life, supersize your faith, even during the restrictions of a pandemic. Number 3, engage in a missional endeavor together. There's a lot of different missional endeavors we could do, but we are going to be focused on this $25 sock and groceries. I have no idea how many socks or how many bags of groceries we are going to be able to provide people who need it, but I can't wait to see that number grow as we get missional and don't just think of ourselves, but we actually serve other people in this way. Number 4, form a COVID platoon. And number 5 is actually kind of a fun one. Train yourself daily with the yarn challenge. Now again, this one comes straight out of Scripture. 1 Timothy 4, 7, and 8. It says, do not waste time arguing over godless ideas and old wives' tales. Instead, train yourself to be godly. And then the next verse says, physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and in the life to come. So here's what's happening on Instagram and Facebook. Starting today, November the 8th, is day 1 of the COVID 30-day connecting challenge. Every single day, we are going to give you a connecting challenge. It's going to be simple. It's going to be doable. It's going to be something that's going to help remind you about all these principles that we're learning together, and it's just going to be fun to do. So go to Instagram or Facebook today, and you'll see a big number 08, and it's going to be day 1 of the daily challenge. This is going to go on for 30 days, and the way you mark it off, I don't know if you're like me, I love checklists. In fact, with my checklist, I check it, then I strike it out, and then I highlight it. I call it triple pleasure. It's amazing. Well, you're not going to get triple pleasure on this one. You're just going to get one chance. But on Instagram or Facebook, either hit the heart or the like, and this is going to be your indication that you completed that challenge for the day. If you didn't complete it, you don't need to like it or put a heart on it. But if you did it, that's your check mark. Hey, I did this challenge for today. Bring on tomorrow's challenge because I'm ready for the next challenge. All right, something else you're going to find on Instagram and Facebook after every service is our 4 message application questions. Again, now we're circling back. Talk to your churchies, talk to your COVID platoon, get together your family, talk to some people, make sure you take this message and don't just let it bounce around in your head, but rather take this message, talk it out, let it roll off your tongue, and apply it to your hearts and your souls. Okay, we've learned a lot of stuff today. I've given you a lot of challenges today. We need to wrap up our time together right now, so it's back to Ben and the worship team to lead us in one last moment of worship together.